It's a story of risk, survival, and resilience. You've probably heard people talk about packing up and starting a new life abroad. But what happens when you do it with nothing in your pockets? No savings, no safety net. Just the clothes on your back, a dream, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. This is my story of how I moved to the Philippines with no money, a lot of hope, and how I turned that gamble into a life that's richer in ways I never expected. The decision to move to the Philippines wasn't made on a whim. I'd been to Asia before, but there was something magnetic about the Philippines. The people, the culture, the beaches, everything felt like an invitation to start fresh. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a job waiting for me, and I definitely didn't have a financial cushion to soften the blow. But something told me this was the right move, even though it sounded insane. When I arrived, I had exactly $200 in my pocket. That's it. No more, no less. To put it into perspective, that's about a week's rent in some places in Manila, or a few days' worth of food in a decent restaurant. Not much to work with. My first step was finding a place to stay, but I had to make sure it was within my budget, no fancy hotels or air-conditioned apartments. I was looking for the cheapest, simplest accommodation I could find. After a day of walking around, I managed to find a modest room in a small boarding house. It wasn't much, just a bed, a fan, and a shared bathroom, but it was enough for me to survive. I was lucky that the landlord was understanding and didn't ask for a hefty deposit up front. It was a moment of serendipity, a reminder that sometimes life gives you just what you need when you're at your lowest point. The next challenge was food. I had no idea where my next meal was coming from, and the reality of living in a foreign country with almost no money started to hit hard. I didn't want to be a burden, but I also couldn't afford to be picky. I began eating street food. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap, filling, and local. A meal for less than $1, if you know where to look. Whether it was isaw, grilled chicken intestines, balut, duck embryo, or simple rice and noodles, I found comfort in the rhythm of food that was simple, cheap, and surprisingly delicious. But surviving wasn't just about food and shelter. It was about finding ways to make money in a country where I had no network, no job, and no real prospects. At first, it felt hopeless. I applied for random jobs online, but nothing came through. I needed to think outside the box. That's when I realized that I could leverage my skills in a completely different way. I had experience in digital marketing and social media, and so I began offering my services to small businesses, locals, and even expats who needed help building an online presence. In the beginning, I took anything I could get, even if it meant working for almost nothing. I charged very little, sometimes just enough to cover my food or transportation for the week. But slowly, things began to snowball. Word got around and I started getting more clients. As my reputation grew, so did my rates. That's when I started to see a glimmer of hope. What started as a desperation project turned into a legitimate freelance business. Through it all, one of the most important lessons I learned was the power of community. In the Philippines, people are incredibly friendly, warm, and willing to help, especially when they see someone struggling. I befriended locals who taught me about their culture, and in return, I shared what little knowledge I had. The sense of belonging I found in the Philippines made me realize how crucial it is to be open, kind, and ready to embrace others, even when you feel like you have nothing to offer. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. I went through moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I'd made a huge mistake. When the money ran out, when clients were slow to pay, or when I was forced to make sacrifices to stretch my budget. There were days when I'd eat just one meal or skip meals altogether just to make sure I had enough to pay rent at the end of the week. These were the tough moments, but looking back, they were also the moments that forced me to grow and become resourceful in ways I never thought possible. I also had to learn how to adapt to a culture that was so different from what I was used to. The pace of life in the Philippines is much slower than in Western countries. Things that I thought would be easy, like opening a bank account, getting a phone number, or dealing with bureaucratic procedures, often turned into hours of waiting and miscommunication. It was frustrating at first, but with time, I learned how to navigate the system and embrace the laid-back vibe. The Philippines taught me patience in ways I didn't expect, and over time, I became more comfortable in my new environment. There were moments of pure magic, though. The sunrises on white sandy beaches in Palawan, the impromptu karaoke sessions with new friends, the joy of getting lost in the streets of Manila, discovering hidden gems of restaurants, and sitting in cafes where people were more interested in talking than working. These small moments became the currency of my survival. It wasn't about the money, but about creating connections, living in the present, and embracing the simple joys of life. But I also had to be smart. I couldn't afford to be wasteful. I learned to live minimally, and I realized that I didn't need much to be happy. I started to get creative with what I had, whether it was finding ways to make food last longer or figuring out the cheapest ways to get from one place to another. The Philippines' public transport system, although chaotic, became my best friend. Jeepneys, tricycles, and buses were my lifelines, allowing me to get around for mere cents. And as my income grew, I was able to treat myself to little indulgences, like a decent meal at a local restaurant or a weekend trip to one of the many beautiful islands. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I felt like giving up, but every small victory felt monumental. Slowly, I built a life that I could be proud of, a life that was not defined by the amount of money I had, but by the experiences I gained. I learned that survival doesn't always come from having a lot of resources. Sometimes, it comes from the ability to make the most out of what you have. Today, I live in the Philippines with a sustainable freelance business, an incredible group of friends, and a deeper understanding of what it means to live with intention. I have made peace with the idea that survival isn't just about meeting your basic needs. It's about thriving, growing, and finding joy in the process. I may have arrived with no money, but what I gained along the way was priceless. The Philippines didn't just offer me a place to live, it gave me a chance to rebuild my life, learn new things, and grow in ways I never thought possible. If you're thinking about making a big leap like I did, know this: the road is tough, but the rewards are worth it. You may not have everything you think you need, but with resilience, a bit of creativity, and the willingness to embrace the unknown, you can create a life you never imagined. The key is not how much you have, but how resourceful you can be. I moved to the Philippines with no money, and somehow I survived. But more than that, I thrived. And you can too.